Let's make a currency converter. So this will get some information from the user and give an exchange rate. Now, it's not a perfect program. It doesn't bring in the data from anywhere, so you have to go look for the data. But that's a good place to start, and then you'll see how convenient it is later on to make more advanced programs that actually bring the data in. So we're going to do it the long way to start with, and then we'll work towards bringing in data. So I'm just going to run through the full programs here. So enter the name of the currency. Okay, so let's say United States dollar, enter the exchange rate 0.72. And let's say I want to convert $500. It tells me that 500 Australian dollars will give me 360 United States dollars. So let's now have a look at Python. Now I might say the Mexican peso, 13.25 from memory. And Australian dollars, let's say I've got 986. The Sri Lankan rupee, which is 128 and 56 cents. Let's say I've got 2,500 Australian dollars, and that will give me that result. So let's have a look now at how we make the program. So we'll look at Scratch first. First thing I've done here is I've put a comment. You just right click and add comment. So the idea here is just to help people that they've got your program and they can go somewhere with it. And again, it's a little bit clunky, but it's a good place to start. So this is just simply a Google search of AUD to Australian dollar to US dollars. And we've got that by default. And you can look up any currency here, Sudanese pound. So this is actually doing the exchange for you. So technically you don't need it, but the whole point is to learn how to do it. We've got this reference point as a place to get our data from at this stage until we learn to import data into our program. We've got this reference, so we can keep that open while we work with our program. So what I did is I copied this very long URL into a URL shortener, and then I've just saved it with the program. So then we've got some user inputs. Get the name of the currency, save that in a variable called currency. Enter the exchange rate, get the user input, save that in a variable called exchange rate. Ask how many dollars they want to convert, save that user input into a variable called Australian dollars. And then we do this calculation of Australian dollars multiplied by the exchange rate and save that in a variable called calculate. And then we simply output whatever number Australian dollars the user inputs. And then the sentence reads, that many Australian dollars will give you. It does the calculation. We've got a space here to separate. It says the name of the currency that they input back up here. We're assuming they haven't put an S on the end so that our output looks smooth. All right, so I'm going to break this apart and I'm going to check all of our variables so that we can see them populate with data. I'll move the button just down here a bit. So first step, instead of doing when green flag clicked, I did just the when this sprite clicked and new costume, and I picked a button just to get away from the cat, make it look a little bit more like a program. So that's in we've got the built-in variable answer, but we're going to save it in currency because we've got a few answers to follow. So let's have a look and just to check what's going on. So now if I bring the next one, so this value is going to change, which is why we're storing it in separate variables. So now the program's going to ask the name of the currency, save that in a variable, and then it's going to ask for the exchange rate. So let's grab a new one. Let's grab something a bit different. Let's get the Mozambican Metical, 44.76. So click on here. That's in there, except I've spelt it wrong. So we can see this one is now populated. So this answer the only way you can work this in Scratch is when you've got multiple inputs, you have to save it to a variable. Okay, and then the last thing is how many Australian dollars do you want to convert, and that user input goes into this variable called Australian dollars, and then we simply calculate whatever this value is times whatever the exchange rate is. And how many Australian dollars? Let's say 3,000. So we've got calculate has formed here. So now we want to put that answer, we want to put the value of that variable into a concatenation. Now it's always a good idea to just output the answer just to start with. Let's say I've got 8,000. And we can see it gives you an answer, so we know that works, and we check that the calculation makes sense before we proceed further. So now it's concatenating that into a sensible output. So we can take that off, and if we just said, if we click on this, we can see it gives you Australian dollars, which is the user input, will give you. So that's fine. Now we want to, if I join it this way, so now when we put in the calculation, so see how there's no space here, so we need a space. So I'm happy with how that output looks, and now I can put that in the say block. Okay, so that's the Scratch version. I'm going to do JavaScript first because it's easier, as we don't have to do so much conversion back and forth. So we'll do JavaScript first. So I'm going to just start with some pseudocode. So I've put in that tiny URL to be able to allow the users to be able to copy from here into a new tab to make it easy for them. I'm going to get the user inputs. Now they are strings by default. That doesn't matter so much in JavaScript, but just it's good to know what your data types are doing throughout your program. We're going to do our calculation, and then we're going to concatenate the output. So first input is prompt of enter the name of the currency. So if I run this now, I get the prompt box. I can put in peso, but I've got nowhere to put it. So I need to store that in a variable called currency and assign it the value of the user input. Next user input is enter the exchange rate, and again I want to assign it to a variable, and this variable is called exchange rate. The last prompt we need is we need to find out how many Australian dollars does the user want to convert, and we want to also save that in a variable. So quickly test our program at this point. So enter the name of the currency, enter the exchange rate. So these values are all stored in variables, but now we need to do the calculation. We need to tell the program to do the calculation. So we're simply going to multiply that variable by the value of that variable, and we want to save this in a variable called calculate and assign it the value of those user inputs. And just to test, I'm going to test my output here. So I'm going to say, what is the value of this variable after the calculation has been done? Yeah, so we've got that part of the concatenation. So now I want to concatenate how many Australian dollars did I start with? So I'm going to say Australian dollars, the value of Australian dollars, plus the word version of Australian dollars will give you, and then I just want to add on whatever the user typed in as the name of the currency. And I'm going to also add on the letter S on the end. And that's not foolproof. Let's do the Turkish lira, which is $3.80. I've got 4,000 Australian dollars. Now I can see I've got spacing issues. So I can put a space here. I can put a space here. However, I'm still going to have an issue here. So between this variable and this variable, I've got no space. So what I can do is put in a space essentially as a string of text. So now we're going to do exactly the same thing in Python. But the problem we're going to have in Python is that the user input is a string. Then when it goes to do the calculation, it'll pop up an error. So we need to convert it to a number. And then when we do the calculation, then when we go to output the string again, we need to convert this numbers back into a string so that we can concatenate them. Sounds very confusing. And even more so, we've got decimal points now, which introduces a new data type in Python called floats. And floats don't really go so well even with integers, so we have to multiply by floats. All right, let's just jump into it. Keep this same logic in mind, and you should be fine. Okay, so let's have a look at our logic. So we've got the URL for the user to be able to copy from here, and you can actually option and click to open the link. We've got to get the user inputs, which are string by default. And now we have to then convert the relevant inputs to float, not integers, for our program to work. And then we have to do the calculation. And then we convert everything back to a string to prepare for the concatenation. And then we do the concatenation output. So here's the user inputs. 3 variables: currency, exchange rate, Australian dollars. And exactly like we did in the other programs, we've got user input and they're stored in those variables. Now, 2 of those variables are going to be converted into the float type. And after we do this, I'll show you the error that we'll get if we didn't do this step. And then we want to do the calculation, which is simply multiplying this variable by that variable, which are floats at this point, stored in a variable called calculate. Then we've got to change everything back to a string so that we can output. So Australian dollars is back to a string, calculate is back to a string. The other variables aren't in the output, so it doesn't matter. And then we print the output. So we are now string plus a string plus a string and a space, a string and another string. So this is how Python works. Now let's run the program. Okay, so you can see here, even though they're strings, it's still the float output. So this is a float. Now let me show you what happened if we turn them to integers and not floats. Let's see how far our program runs before it errors. So we'll get up to line 6, is looking okay. And now we have the error message. And it says invalid literal for integer with a base 10, 13.25. So that's because we've put in a decimal place, we've put in a float, and it doesn't like it. But let me just check that what is the type of exchange rate of this variable at this point in the program? It's a string. These are things that you have to work with Python. It's very literal. You have to get the right data type and convert it back. Over time, you work out some tricks that can shortcut the process a little bit. And we'll get into that later on. Okay, well, that's the end of this video, which is a very basic exchange rate that relies on the user having the information or getting the information. And then down the track, we can look to make a similar application with an interface that populates a choice of currencies.